Well, need I tell you that there is a growing sense of hopelessness and a declining satisfaction with democracy amongst South Africans. And this is according to the latest social attitude survey that's done by the Human Sciences Research Council. The survey shows a decline in levels of life satisfaction as a whole, a downturn in people's views about what lies ahead in their lives. Now, this pessimism is observed across all race and gender groups, although older people are more pessimistic about future life optimism. Why are South Africans fed up with their prospects and their democracy? Well, let's try and find an answer to that question. And we're joined by Dr. Stephen Gordon. He's a senior research specialist in the Developmental, Capable and Ethical State. That's, of course, a research division of the Human Sciences Research Council, the HSRC. Great to have you, Doctor. Thank you very, very much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
So let's just give a little bit of context before we start digging deeper into the findings of the survey. Explain how the social attitude survey actually works.
Well, the South African Social Attitude Survey is a large public opinion survey which has been conducted since 2003. It is led by Dr. Benjamin Roberts, and it is a large nationally representative survey. The survey sample population in 2021 was 2,996. Those results are then weighted to be nationally representative according to the gold standard of public opinion surveys internationally. The results presented to you here today represent the adult population of South Africa, 16 years and older. And unfortunately, the picture that is presented is, as you've indicated, very dire. Some of the most dire findings we've seen in more than 20 years of research analysis.
And I suppose that, as we were saying offline, it doesn't necessarily come as a surprise, does it? Because we feel it and we see it every day amongst South Africans that are feeling very despondent and almost hopeless at a point like this. But I just want to still talk a little about the workings of the survey. So you say you've been around since 2003. The findings we're going to discuss are actually from 2021, and we'll talk to some of the results that are going to be coming out very shortly, which kind of read to the same feeling that was in 2021 in the country. But you say the adult population, how many people are surveyed? How does the survey work?
Sure. So every year, field workers visit 3,500 addresses. And our realization rate, the number of people who agree to be interviewed, is very high, usually about 80%. So in a given year, the survey sample population will be about 3,000. That population is then weighted using a mathematical algorithm to be representative of the adult population, allowing you to say, how are adult South Africans feeling about a given issue? Satisfaction with democracy, satisfaction with service delivery, trust in the government. You can then track changes over time. You can also look at changes among certain population groups, age group, gender group, class group, racial group, provincial group, language group. So it really allows you a really in-depth analytical picture of what is going on in the hearts and minds of South Africans each year. Powerful research tool that is great for understanding how our nation is changing. And it was also great for understanding what policy interventions we need to take to address serious problems that can be identified.
Yeah. So when we look at, since this was brought about, I mean, I've got a graph that basically shows us from 2014 up until 2021. It started off at 52%. The big drop came in 2017. You can perhaps tell us what happened in 2017, that South Africans felt quite despondent and hopeless. It went up slightly, but then now, when we go right down in 2021, it's sitting at that 41%, which is quite a significant drop and the lowest it's been. I'm not sure what it was like in 2003, but for the last 10 years, this is the lowest it's been. Perhaps talk to us about what led us down in 2017 and again now. What led the sense of hopelessness?
So one has to remember 2017 was an extremely unstable period in South African history, both politically as well as economically. There was concerns regarding the presidency, and this, of course, had additional concerns regarding the state of the economy. Indeed, there were significant concerns regarding the change from President Jacob Zuma to Cyril Ramaphosa and whether this would produce a peaceful and good result for the South African people. So in the end of 2017, there was a lot of concern about this issue, and we can definitely see that reflected in the data. Now, if you look in the previous years, what seems to have happened is that there was a degree of euphoria, very mute euphoria, that things had gone peacefully, that things were turning around, that the economy might be set for an improvement, that we were on the up. And we can really see this not just in life satisfaction data. You look at trust in democracy, trust in national government, you see movements like this, and there are many other indicators you could point to. What appears to happen, in 2020 is that, early surveying in the beginning of the pandemic will show you that people were very happy with the response from Cyril Ramaphosa to the pandemic, and people were very supportive of his initial policies in addressing the health and economic shocks of that early period. However, what seems to have occurred beginning in late 2020 and then 2021 is that people grow more despondent about the state of the economy, particularly the state of service delivery. We start to see a lot of dissatisfaction with electricity provision, and then this has knock-on effects. If electricity provision is not working very well, this is knock-on effects on other types of provisions such as water and sanitation, the failure in economic recovery to stimulate job creation, which job creation is still down. This has also negatively affected people's attitudes. There is definitely a feeling within the country, if you go to communities both at the middle class level as well as the working class level, that we are on the wrong track as a nation, that particularly crises around issues like Eskom, like the economy, have made people feel very despondent about the future. So, for example, you talked about life satisfaction, a big drop, 10% in less than 10 years. Life satisfaction is not really supposed to move that dramatically. Life satisfaction is quite resistant to sort of everyday change. So this definitely shows you a significant depreciation of people's perceived quality of life. Another thing that's really serious is do you think life will improve over the next 5 years? So that's kind of an optimism measure. Yeah. So that was 44% in 2014, not very high, but it had a reasonable level. But if you ask people in 2021, it was only 29%. Gosh. So this is significant. And if we look at generationally, which you pointed out, the results are even more concerning. So let's talk a little bit about millennials, the first born-free generation. Now, in 2014, half of this group thought that life was going to get better in the next 5 years. In 2021, it was only 28%. Right? So even though young people are more optimistic, they're becoming less optimistic over time. Another good example is what they call Generation Z. It's those people born after the millennials, usually about the late 1990s, the 2000s. In 2017, when we have large numbers of this generational cohort come through in the sample, we saw that 70% of them were quite optimistic over the next 5 years. They thought life was going to get good. Young people tend to be more optimistic. But then if you ask them in 2021, only 40% said that life was going to improve over the next 5 years. So even the youngest, most optimistic people in the country are starting to lose hope, starting to become more despondent. And this is really serious knock-on effects for democratic behavior. Because when people start to become dissatisfied with their lives, when they start to lose hope in the future, they become less good Democrats. They tend to express less interest in voting. They think democracy is not working very well. and they tend to lose their faith in the democratic system. This is a serious problem for South Africa. We've seen very low voter turnouts in the 2019 national and provincial elections. We saw low turnout again in our recent local government elections, and now going up to a large national and provincial election cycle in 2024, this low turnout scenario could repeat itself if we don't see a turnaround in people's sense that life can get better.
And this is it's quite scary what you are saying, because what sort of is very blatant is the optimism that people started out 2020 with, thinking things were going to change. Obviously, as you were saying, the narrative of the savior coming in, taking South Africa to new heights and new levels after how we all felt in the times you described as 2017, and yet watching this just drop significantly through whether it be a pandemic and the lack of leadership that's going to a point now where we perhaps are at the lowest levels we've ever been. Do you suggest that this research could actually be used as a predictive mechanism to inform decision makers and policy making processes going forward? Because surely policymakers and these decision makers should address the factors that are contributing to the hopelessness and despair among South Africans.
Absolutely. There's been a real shift internationally in how we think about quality of life indicators. There was a time when GDP, gross domestic product, was really the gold standard on how we measure progress as a nation. But increasingly people are saying it's not really about GDP, it's about quality of life. If people feel that there's something wrong with their lives, if they don't feel optimistic about the future, if they have low quality of life, obviously there's something wrong in a society, and we should be geared towards maximizing quality of life, not necessarily maximizing GDP. It doesn't really matter if GDP goes up if quality of life goes down. So obviously we need to look at those indicators which are going to make quality of life go up. Now, what makes quality of life go up? Obviously economic opportunity, having jobs, having reliable public utilities, electricity, water, refuse collection, having reliable healthcare, lower inequality, lower crime. These are the kind of things that would improve quality of life in South Africa. And if you ask people what are the most important issues facing this country at the moment, they will tell you unemployment, they will tell you crime, they will tell you poverty, they will talk about service delivery. These are the issues that they want addressed. So if policymakers use public opinion data to design strategies to improve people's quality of life, we would definitely see this situation turn around. It is just very sad to see the indicators fall the way that we do. We've just gone through a long weekend. We've celebrated Freedom Day. We've celebrated Workers' Day. These should be times of recognition of the meaningful gains in justice that we have made as a nation over the last 30 years. But instead, many people are expressing cynicism and despondency about the state of our country and the way it's moving forward. And I think this really shows us that there's an urgency for change, progressive, meaningful change.
Which is quite worrisome. It really is. When you you look at the psyche of a country, and you were also telling me that as much as we're looking at these results from 2022, I know the official results, because it seems that you work in a sort of a year previously. 2022 results are coming out very, very shortly. In fact, they've already been they done. And what you're saying is once they're released publicly, we'll be able to see them. But they're not much different to what we saw in 2021. So this mood is continuing. It's not getting any better, which again is not a surprise, because we've come out of a time that was very, very hard on South Africans in terms of a pandemic, and we're almost in a way going into worse times from the repercussions and picking up all of the downfalls that we had and perhaps were not addressed when we moved into this pandemic. So just early signs from 2022, perhaps you can give us a little bit of what you've seen coming out of it.
Sure. So obviously, Dr. Benjamin Roberts, who is one of the foremost public opinion scholars in South Africa, will present the 22 results at some future date. But if we consider what is coming through in the data, we definitely do not see a meaningful improvement in satisfaction in democracy, quality of life, and a feeling that things will get better. But also we see some downscale. We see some attitudes becoming worse. And one of them will not surprise you is satisfaction with electricity provision has become substantially worse. If we think about what it was in the 2010s, early 2010s, it was very high. 70% of South Africans were satisfied with the electricity provision. Now, if you ask people, it's very low, in the 20s. So this suggests that there has been a significant decline in people's evaluations and faith in Eskom. Indeed, we see satisfaction with electricity provision increasingly tied to how people are feeling about the state of democracy and about democracy itself. Yeah. So satisfaction with the way democracy is working is increasingly associated with the strength of public utility provision, which is definitely a worrying sign given the state of where we are.
Indeed. All right.
So unfortunately, there isn't a lot of good news that will come out of the 2022 data.
I don't imagine. I have to stop you there, but I'm going to wrap the interview. But we have, of course, got elections next year. And everything you're saying is not necessarily boding so well for these elections in terms of voter turnout, in terms of voting towards the party that's already in power, and that, of course, being the ANC. People may be looking for change, or people just being completely despondent and saying, what difference does my vote make? Can we read anything into that very quickly from the starter?
Absolutely. So we conduct a election satisfaction survey. And one of those election satisfaction survey questions is, when did you decide to come to the polls to vote? We find that a large share of the adult population only come to the poll, only make that decision a month or a week before the actual election. So to use this type of data to predict future outcomes is always going to be a bit problematic, because people only make a decision whether to turn up fairly late in the process.
Indeed. So we'll keep a lookout for that. However, I think we can read into it, and never mind the week before. I think on the day as well, people decide, I think I'm going to go vote, or I'm not going to vote. So it is a hard one to predict. But Dr. Gordon, thanks for talking to us here on the program. Dr. Stephen Gordon is a senior research specialist in the Developmental, Capable and Ethical State Research Division of the Human Sciences Research Council, that's really speaking about the souring mood among South Africans, and it's not looking good at all. Don't suppose it's a surprise to any of you listening.